All right, in this section, we're going to cover how do we configure layer 2 port channels on these switches. So currently we have switch 1 and we have switch 2, and we have two links connecting the two. If I go show IP interface brief, you can see here that we have a couple interfaces that are up. These links, gig 01 and gig 02, are the links between switch 1 and switch 2. Similarly, if I go show CDP neighbors, we can see that switch 2 is connected via these two interfaces, and then it is a 9200 series switch. So now what we're going to do is configure the port channel on this side of the link, and then we will come back and show the other side of the link. So here's what we'll do. We'll say config T, or configure terminal. We're going to go into global configuration mode, and then here we're going to say interface. This is a really cool command too, by the way, interface range, and we're going to say gig 0/1-2. Now what's cool about this is if I wanted to say add another one, I could say gig 0/8, and it'll also do that particular one. So you just have to separate them with a comma and a space. So I could do this range and do 3 ports. I could even do this and then do 4 ports, ports 1 and 2, and then 8 and 10. Just something to keep in mind. It's a really cool command to configure a lot of ports at the same time. So we hit this range command. Now you can see that we're in the range configuration mode. And what we'll do here is we will say channel group 1. We were going to do channel group 12 on both switches. However, the compact switch that I'm working on now only supports up to channel groups 1 through 6. So we're going to do channel group 1 just to show what we're talking about here. And then we're going to say mode active. And what that does is that's going to use LACP to actively try to generate that ether channel. So we're going to click enter here. We have that configured. By default, what that will do, the second you type in channel group and a number and then turn it on or hit active or anything like that, what it does is it creates a port channel interface. So if I say port 1, you see that there's a port-channel interface 1 that was created automatically. There's no config under it because as of right now, there's no real config under those gig interfaces. So if I show you these, it just adopts whatever interface configuration you have. So you see it's active. We see this side of the link is working. Now what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to another switch and we're going to see if we can get it working on that side. So I have set up just basic connectivity between these two switches, and we're going to go ahead and get into that switch. Now in this particular case, we see we are on switch 2, and what I will do is the exact same thing, interface range gig, except on this side, because it's a 9200 series, it is gigs 1/0/1-2. Different models have different naming of their switch ports. Some could be 1/0, some could be 0/1. Depending on if you have modular switches, those numbers will change and vary as well. So just keep in mind that depending on what type of device you're working on, from a study perspective, you might have fast Ethernet interfaces, you might have gigabit Ethernet, you might have 10 gigabit, and how those interfaces are labeled could be different based on a platform by platform basis. So now you see we're here, we're going to hit interface range. We're then going to say what? Channel group 1 mode active. We're going to click enter, and then we're going to end here, and we're going to do a show run interface port channel 1. See, it created a port channel 1 interface. Then we're going to do a show run int gig 1/0/1. Enter. See, there's not a lot of configuration there, but it is configured on both sides as active. So now that we have this configured on both sides as active, let's take a look at some verification commands. So if we do show ether channel and just hit show ether channel, type enter, a couple things you're going to notice: that we're currently operating in a layer 2 state, which is what we mentioned. Since we're not doing any layer 3 routing, we're still operating in a layer 2 state. We can see that it also has 2 ports in a port channel, and that it has a maximum of 16 ports that can be bonded into this port channel. Now, that is sometimes platform specific as well. Some will allow 8, some will allow 16, some even 32. So it's always best to make sure that, depending on how many ether channels you're creating in your environment, you look at that based on how many channel group numbers it will allow you to configure. Now, we also see that is using LACP, or that link aggregation control protocol, because we specified active on both sides. Now, another command we can issue is the show ether channel summary. So if I do that, you see quite a bit more information. You see that it is indeed using port channel group 1, port channel 1 interface. The S specifies that it is indeed a layer 2 ether channel, and that the U specifies that it is indeed in use. So when you see S and U, you know it's layer 2 and it is in use. Now we're going to get into some routed ones here shortly, but just note that, there'll be an R instead of an S if you're doing routed. Now the other thing we're looking at right here, it also says we're using LACP, but it specifies what ports gig 101 and 102 are also in this port channel, and the P specifies that it is already bundled into that port channel. So these two interfaces are bundled using LACP into port channel 1, and it is a layer 2 used port channel. The port channel is in use. All right, we're back. So one of the things I want to do is showcase how we can make different configuration changes. So one example here would be going to the port channel interface, and then we can specify some sort of configuration. So for example, let's say description, and we'll say uplink to switch 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Looks cool. Now if I do a do show interface description, there's some information that you'll see here. Down here on port channel 1, there's an interface description that has been configured for us. Now, there are certain things you can do on layer 2 and layer 3 ether channels where you can configure certain things on the port channel interface, and it will come down and automatically show that information on the subsequent interfaces. But in this particular case, description is not one of them. So now we have this configured. If I were on port channel 1, I should be able to say something like, I don't know. Let's see here. Speed 1000. And hit enter. Now if I do a do, see there, it should bounce when you change speeds. There you go. And see, if I do show interface gig 1/0/1, boom, you see we're connected, we're running full duplex 1 gig, and it is still functioning. So now let's see if it did anything for the configuration. There it is. Now, what you notice is I did not configure the speed on the individual gigabit Ethernet interfaces, gig 101 and 102. I configured it on the port channel interface, and it took that information. Duplex would be another one. Certain attributes that could be adopted by those ports would then be configured on the port channel, and it'll automatically push those attributes down to those ports, which is another nice thing of having a port channel or an ether channel configured, because you can configure things in one spot and it will automatically inherit those to those different interfaces. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what a layer 3 ether channel looks like. Now when we're configuring routed ether channels, there's some order of operations of things that we need to consider when we're configuring these. The first is that when we configure them, we have to turn switching off on the interfaces that we want to become layer 3. So for example, we're going to say interface range gig 0/1-2. We're going to say no switch port. What that does is that turns those switch ports from being layer 2 into a layer 3 routed port that you can actually apply an IP address to. So now it's no switch port. You can put an IP address directly right on that interface. We're not doing that here though. We're going to do that on the port channel interface, and that is what I was talking about from an order of operations. We said no switch port. We made these 2 ports layer 3. It's essentially at that point. So then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to say channel group 1 mode, and we're going to pick on so we can show you what nailing up a ether channel looks like. We're just going to say channel mode channel group 1 mode on. When we do that, that essentially would force those interfaces up. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to move into configuring port channel interface 1. Here we will also say no switch port, and by doing that, that turns that port channel interface into a layer 3 interface as well that commands the other 2. So now that we have that, we can put an IP address on that layer 3 port channel. So what we'll do is we'll pick one. I'm going to be using, we're going to use 102, if I can type it correctly, 102, and this is switch 1, so we'll put .25 with a /24, which is a subnet mask of 255.255.255. So once I configure this IP address, it now has a layer 3 IP address on this side. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to the other switch, and we are also going to configure that. And what's nice about this is because we have multiple ways of getting to these other switches, we can configure them, bounce back and forth, and we can show both sides of the configuration, which is ultimately what we're trying to do here. The other thing is that, let me X that out. The other thing is that I have configured this portion as well on the other side, so you'll be able to see. So let me jump over there and show you what it looks like. Type in Cisco. Now we're on switch 2. So on switch 2, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say interface. Actually, I'm going to show you these. Do show run int gig 1/0/1, and then 1/0/2. So now what you see is we've already made the changes on this side that say no switch port, which means we're turning this into a layer 3 port at that point. We're turning off its layer 2 capabilities. We are not assigning an IP address to each individual port because we're going to assign it to the port channel that has a layer 3 interface that will essentially bundle those two now routed ports together with one single virtual IP address. So we'll show you that in just a sec. And then if we say do show run int port channel 1, you'll see that we have still the uplink description. We said that it was not a switch port, and we have applied this IP address to that side. So now, if I end here and I say show EtherChannel summary, you see that everything we saw and talked about before still applies, except now we see that there is an R, which means it is a routed layer 3 ether channel between these two links. We see that both ports are also bundled and participating in this port channel indicated by this P. So I haven't even validated anything other than the fact that it is configured. So now what we want to do is we want to do a ping 192.168.102.25 sourcing from port channel 1 interface. So by doing that, we are sending a ping from switch 1 over to switch 2, and then you can see that it is sending it to this IP address with a source of our own IP address, and we meet with success. So now, if I were to say show EtherChannel and hit enter, some things have changed. So it looks like based on the software here, for a layer 3 routed EtherChannel, you can have a maximum of 8 instead of 16. And we are indeed in a L3 routed EtherChannel layer 3 type bundle that we were not in before. Now, we can also say show EtherChannel detail, which shows us a little bit more information. For example, shows us the same information we just looked at, which was the show EtherChannel. And then as we scroll down a little bit, I'll hit enter so we can see these. We can see that our port state is that it's up, that we're in channel group 1, that the mode is on, and you can see different information like port channel 1. And then as you scroll down here, you can see the current state. This ether channel has been up for 10 minutes now. The port channel, port 2 in the port channel is gig 10/2. That is up, same thing. You can see all the same information. If I space out and I come down, you can see more information that, again, the port channel has been up for a little period of time here. But here, it tells you what the port numbers are that build up that port channel. So one command gives you a tremendous amount of information. And if it's the only command you remember is show EtherChannel detail, you'll get a lot of information, and it kind of makes up a lot of the other commands that we talked about. Show EtherChannel, show EtherChannel summary. Now we have show EtherChannel detail, which will show us these different things and what the bonding is for these different ports. As well as if you scroll down a little bit here, it tells you some other information like what are the ports in the port channel based on the index, as well as the number, and that the EtherChannel state in this particular case is on. So you're getting this information multiple different ways in the same command, but you now do have it. And then time since the last port was bundled. You can see this last port went up 10 minutes ago, whereas the first port was up 16 minutes ago. Just something to look at. And that is layer 3 ether channels.